Hi, I'm Professor Dr. Martin Bader from Technical University of Applied Sciences in Ingolstadt, Germany, and adjunct professor at McGill University in Montreal in Canada. And you are listening to IP Fridays.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of IP Fridays. Our names are Ken Suzan and Rolf Claessen, and this is the podcast dedicated to intellectual property. It does not matter where you are from, in-house or private practice, novice or expert. We will help you stay up to date with current topics in the fields of trademarks, patents, design and copyright, discover useful tools, and much more.
My co-host Ken Suzan and I are welcoming you to episode 158 of IP Fridays. Today's interview guest is Professor Martin Bader, and in my view, he is the expert when it comes to IP management and in particular patent management. He's consulting some of the top patent filers in the world, and I can pick his brain today. But before we jump into the interview, I have news for you. For years, German retailers faced legal uncertainties when using the term Black Friday in promotions, as it was a registered trademark. Unauthorized use risked costly cease-and-desist letters. However, after multiple legal challenges, the Federal Court of Justice in Germany, BGH, confirmed that Black Friday is no longer protected as a trademark. This decision allows retailers to freely use the term in their marketing without fear of legal repercussions. On November 25, 2024, the German Patent and Trademark Office, DPMA, began participating in WIPO's Digital Access Service, DAS, as a depositing office for patents and utility models. This allows applicants to request priority documents electronically through WIPO DAS, enabling secure and efficient sharing of these documents with participating IP offices worldwide. Applicants can request electronic priority documents for free using Form A9164 or opt for paper copies at a fee. When processing, the DPMA provides a confidential access code for retrieval of the documents via DAS. On October 31, 2024, the European Commission fined Teva Pharmaceuticals for 462.6 million euros for abusing its dominant market position to delay competition against its multiple sclerosis drug Copaxone. The Commission determined that Teva misused the patent system by filing multiple divisional patents to extend Copaxone's exclusivity and engaged in a systematic campaign to spread misleading information about a competing glatiramer acetate product, thereby hindering its market entry. The Unified Patent Court's Düsseldorf local division that the Carbonator Pro of Arke AB infringed SodaStream Industries' European patent, which pertains to a device for carbonating liquids with pressurized gas. The court interpreted the term flask in the patent claim broadly, encompassing Ark's design despite differences from SodaStream's illustrations. Ark's defense, invoking the Gillette defense, asserting their product mirrored prior art and thus couldn't infringe a valid patent, was rejected as Ark didn't file a counterclaim challenging the patent's validity. Consequently, the court granted SodaStream a permanent injunction against Ark's product in 7 UPC member states, reinforcing the importance of precise claim interpretation and the limitation of the Gillette defense in infringement-only proceedings. Gibson has issued a cease-and-desist letter to 16 Creative, the company behind the newly launched Trump guitars, alleging that the design of the electric models infringes upon Gibson's protected Les Paul body shape. The Trump-endorsed guitars, marketed as the only guitar officially endorsed by President Donald J. Trump, feature designs with slogans like Make America Great Again and are priced up to $11,500 for autographed versions. Gibson, known for vigorously protecting its intellectual property, has previously taken similar legal actions against other manufacturers to safeguard its iconic designs. And now let's jump into the interview with Professor Martin Bader. Today's interview guest is Professor Dr. Martin Bader. He is Professor of Technology and Management and Entrepreneurship at the Technical University in Ingolstadt in Germany, adjunct professor at McGill University in Quebec in Canada. He is founder of BGWIP in St. Gallen in Switzerland and also chairman of the supervisory board of BGW Management Advisory Group in Switzerland. And before that, he had several industry positions with MTU, ABB, Siemens, and Infineon, where he was vice president and chief IP counsel. And most importantly, he's an expert in IP management. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you for your invitation.
Yeah, thank you. You are the expert, in my view, at least, for patent management, and you are the author of the standard book on patent management. The 5th edition was just published. For over 20 years, you have been distilling your advisory and research insights into practical takeaways, and you're consulting many companies in this field. What are the top challenges for medium-sized technology-driven companies, let's say with 500 employees, compared to the top challenges for large corporations?
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. And the first question. Yeah, what are the challenges for SMEs, medium-sized companies today? Of course, many of them have their own opinion, but from a, let's say, general outside view and for this discussion here, I think one key challenge is the innovation challenge as such. So, especially the European SMEs have become under pressure from various sides, and one is innovation. Other companies that become almost similar as good, customers that don't want to pay top prices for top quality anymore. And so those companies that are challenged by staying innovative. And in that field, we had like this technology changes. One was a couple of years ago, almost a decade ago, was the so-called digitalization. So the digital transformation that many of those companies had to face, either willingly or by pressure from the outside. And that included, of course, what does that mean for their value chain, for the value creation chain, and what would that mean also for their IP work? So if, to make an example, if a mechanical engineering company value would be more and more perceived by its services and not so much by the static machine as such anymore, of course, the pressure comes also on the IP side. What does a patent on the machine as such dilute compared to, let's say, a protection strategy on the whole services that customers might value more? So this was a big change. And now recently we had a push on the business models. The business models were changing. And now lastly, we had all this AI hype, which is of course not only a hype, but also a serious opportunity, but also a challenge for those who are maybe not so familiar with implementing this technology into their value chain. So I think that's a big change. Then we for many companies, the business got much more international, more global, with more of the competition coming in from emerging countries like, to name just a few, like China or India. And this was changing the field. And compared to the large ones, for example, in Switzerland, the cost pressure has rather been increasing. This is, of course, also based in the currency exchange rate. But if you were to compensate this, it was an additional pressure. So this was like the general stuff around it, but that would also lead to, okay, how do we keep developing? Where do we develop? What we do on our own, what not? What do we outsource? Where do we outsource to? And that would also challenge let's say, the IP angle, where you would think, okay, how can we be very good there on the one hand, and still efficient and effective at the same time.
Mm. So what do you think, like collecting the ideas or collecting new inventions, is it more difficult in smaller companies or more difficult in large corporations? What do you think?
Yes, I have a nice quote maybe on that from a large corporation, international, actually even globally corporation, where one of their executives said, you don't know how lucky you are if you know where your inventors are. And of course, you might know your inventors when they send you their invention file in sort of the note. But the most difficult part are those inventions and inventors where you don't know that they are inventors, or where the inventors even don't know that they are inventors or have invented something new. And typically these areas, it might sound a bit absurd right now, but typically these areas are in fields where new developments are taking place, where like in this transition, this digital transition, all of a sudden the part of the value creation was shifted to was sort of lying in the software development, and classical software developers were not necessarily trained to think like that they would contribute to the IP field. Maybe they were even against it naturally. Same with new business models. So the value creation might shift into service and marketing departments or business development departments, which had never been thinking about that they could be part of an IP strategy where they would contribute significantly to. And in these areas, it might be more difficult to get, first of all, the general understanding in the management, how they can build up a good IP position, and second, where this comes from. So if you just collect the invention disclosures from traditional research or development departments, which is still good to do, but you might missing out on the new value areas that you're creating, that you're investing in, and sort of leaving out the IP dimension or category.
Mm. Yeah, interesting. Thank you so much thank you that I was able to pick your brain and your experience for over 20 years. When you started this book over 20 years ago about IP management and patent management, and the challenges 20 years ago were quite different from today's challenges. What are the topics, in your opinion, that stayed the same, that are the same challenges basically today than compared to 20 years ago? And what topics changed the most? What do you think?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, maybe I should quickly mention how this book that you mentioned, the book Patent Management, the original version was in German, was developed. It was actually a side product from our applied research projects that we did at St. Gallen University at the business school here. We were working closely together in various think tanks with international, established, and large corporations on the one end, and also many of those in especially the German-speaking area, well-known mid-sized family or non-family businesses that were, how we call it, world niche market players. And with them, we discussed their status and how they were practicing IP, what kind of strategies they were applying, how they were creating those strategies, and also how they were implementing those strategies. For example, what kind of processes they would use and what kind of organization they would use to implement their strategies. Also, what type of culture they would have and support in their companies. And also, for example, what would you do in-house and what not? What would you outsource and what not? And I think and the book was basically a summary and a collection of case studies and insights from that phase. And as we continued, we sort of kept those elements that were still confirmed and acknowledged, and we changed and adapted and renewed those cases where we got new insights and new learnings, and were able to publish them. So, and I think the structure is based on the St. Gallen management model, where we say we have a strategy level, where we say we have a conceptual level, and where we have like an implementation level. And this basic understanding didn't change so much. What changed, I think, a lot is that, especially for SMEs, many have become more familiar with working with IP, especially with the basic functions, like for example, you can have inventions. You have an idea how you can protect those inventions, maybe with a patent, or that you can use design rights or trademarks. We even talk about trade secrets those days, or even that is becoming more and more familiar. But what changes, I think that, and I think this is also probably already a note on what you could sort of as a takeaway for the SMEs. Many of those who have started doing these basic things and familiar with the terms, they might say, look, we have now this one central patent manager or IP manager function, and they organize and coordinate everything in the company. Many of those don't have a own patent department. They rely a lot on external support, especially law firms, patent and law firms. And I think what changed is that for one aspect that they have these functions, so they have a dedicated person, they have a dedicated budget, and so on. But the sort of the danger is a little bit that you not updating the need for this function. So, for example, if you just file a patent that comes in, you say, okay, I can count the patents, I file it nicely, you consider where you want the protection, but that's it. And you might not realize, like, for example, that your value creation is shifting from the classical engineering development department towards business development departments, towards in agile project development, into people who work and act totally differently, and that you sort of relying too much on this single person that has to coordinate everything, that you rely maybe too much on external advice. Even basic patent law firms today talk a lot about their expertise or their perceived expertise in knowing what an IP strategy is, compared to, and this is like an principal agent dilemma, compared to the company and this, the management of the company that should know, okay, to become number one is maybe a strategy, and to stay number one is a strategy. And if your key values are created not in the traditional R&D department anymore, like why does a client buy a machine? Maybe it's the performance, the technical performance of the machine, but very likely it's today that you have to add a lot of more features, like services, like software as a service plans, and so on, where you typically cannot act as in traditional machine engineering, patenting. So you have to shift it, and you have to find good people inside. You might not be able, for example, in extra projects, you cannot so easily say anymore, this is only one person centrally that runs behind the IP stuff. You need to integrate this knowledge in, or at least part of this function, in your agile project team. And you might have to be able to work much more agile than a traditional patent and trademark department or traditional IP department might be used to work. So I think this is a big shift. And to get all these new If you look at the AI-powered tools, it's not so easy if you're a small team in an SME company to follow all these developments and to be there in time and to know in time on what kind of investments or what kind of choices you should take. So I think this is a big challenge for SMEs who are in the field of IP, typically also very bootstrapped, very low on resources, including the persons, sort of the HR, and including the financial.
Mm-hmm.
And third one, to mention the last one, I think as the exposure for SMEs who have become more globally international, the exposure has really changed and increased. So if you rely today on decisions, for example, where to file a patent that you took 10 or even earlier, 10 years ago or even earlier, then you might realize that your understanding of the need for your IP portfolio at that time was different than you need it today. Mm-hmm. And second, as we always say, it's not enough just to file a patent, you also, or a trademark, to register a trademark, you also need to survey it and to enforce it, to have things in place.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah. Some people just file patents just for the numbers and they never enforce the patents, and then they are basically worthless, right? If the patents are there for having a monopoly on a certain technology, and if you don't enforce them, then maybe you forfeit your rights or whatever difficulties come along.
You don't call your option, right?
All right. Yeah. You are a professor and you are working a lot on IP management and patent management and doing a lot of research. And while doing this, you know all these service providers and all these companies who offer consulting in IP management and patent management, and you're doing this yourself as well. What do you think are the most important, if let's say a medium-sized company or large corporations also want to get consulting in the field of IP management or patent management, what do they have to look for finding a good help, basically, good consulting? What are the criteria? What do you think?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Indeed, it's, if we listen to the term, for example, like strategy, there are a lot of academic definitions about strategy, but typically when you ask the C-level, the CEOs and CTOs, the C-level, the executive level of a company, and ask their understanding what they perceive as a strategy, which could be, for example, like a goal and the means to achieve that goal, something like that, very, very catchy. And then we talk to, let's say, patent law firms or IP law firms, then you will very often also hear that they say, well, we do strategy too, but when you look what they really mean, it wouldn't be the same level, and it might be much more like a plan, as Eisenhower said, than a real strategy. And I don't mean this in a bad way. To make an example, in Canada, I have an example from Canada. My Canadian friends are fine with that. Instead of taking an example from them here, the government was funding support for companies to create an IP strategy and something like that. So they were giving funds to companies that they would write up an IP strategy and would support consultants or advisors that were supporting those companies in writing it or making up and writing it up. And all of a sudden, within about half a year, almost every IP law firm in North America, especially in Canada, put on their offerings that they now also would offer IP strategy advice. Of course, you can do this. If you're a company and you know what you mean with strategy, of course, that brings you to the point, okay, you choose your advisors. So you should be good enough to know what you should do on your own and for which you need advice. So this is like the first advice to the companies, to know what should you do on your own. And if you don't have it yet, maybe you should get the support to build up these competences. And then if you're competent enough, then you can also outsource certain activities or aspects that you don't feel so familiar with, or where you say it's just handy and nice to have some external support, but then you can steer it. And in academia, there is even in economics, there's a nice term for that. It's called the principal-agent dilemma. So the principal would be the company, and the agent would be a service firm, like a law firm or an IP firm. And there's a typical dilemma that is stated that, of course, the typical law firm, IP law firms have the sort of in their statutes, they have to be neutral and they should support their clients. But of course, they are also entrepreneurs. So they want to increase their business, they want to increase their margin and so on. So we don't have to talk about this. But so it's a dilemma on the agent side. And on the principal side, is it how can you buy in services if you're not professional enough to choose on what kind of service you need and to judge on the quality? So that's a big dilemma. And we even, with another colleague, we will be publishing in the 125 years German patent attorney booklet. There will be a publication. We actually will publish a little article on that, principal-agent dilemma, and how companies can, first of all, understand it, and then second, deal with it. And I think this is the most important part. Typically, when you buy in services that rely on references, what we call the qualities of reference style, then of course you should ask for references. So look for references, look for cases, and don't do this only one time. Do this regular, like a typical procurement department would also do it. Sometimes even the procurement departments are good enough; they just not ask what would be the right system or the right metrics, the right processes that companies have maybe already established to buy in services that rely on reference quality.
Yes.
And just to mention one thing, because you said in the beginning, we also have a company in Switzerland, an advisory company. One reason why we never entered into the patent prosecution business, although we even got a company once offered to buy a patent law firm, said because we want to keep this separate, sort of the managerial part separate from the legal profession, to be very neutral. No conflict of interest.
Yeah. Next, I would like to dive into a more specific and little different topic, especially in view of investors and corporations. What do you think, what relevance do the investors and corporations attach to IP in relation to startups? So when they want to invest in startups or have some other stake in a startup, what do they look for in IP? Is that relevant or not? And what role does IP play there? You currently have a project about this. Maybe you tell our listeners about this project.
Yeah, thank you for this question. It was actually a pretty cool project that started with a former colleague from St. Gallen, who is now also a professor in Regensburg, actually in Germany, at the University of Applied Science. She was with Denmark before, and we said, okay, as we were not competitors anymore, and both professors, we said, maybe we should do something together at the corner of IP and entrepreneurship. She's also an entrepreneur. And so we said, let's do a big think tank and meet people and talk about, for example, how investors would look at if they look at startups, with regard to IP. And the outcome in the end was, we even published a book on it, a big book, but there are a lot of insights there too, but the findings were pretty easy in the end. So what investors look for at startups is three things. One is team, second is market, and the third one is technology. And the IP part comes in predominantly with the third one, with the technology. So the basic question would be, for example, is technology really protected? And that, for example, for the more elevated ones, it would mean, no, it doesn't mean they file any patent, and this is better than no patent, but they filed a patent that has an impact. For example, in disrupting competitors, in copying the product, or one-to-one copying a component that is relevant for the value creation. And second, saying that it would also be attributed to the team. So if the team has no clue what they filed and did or didn't do, then so if the team has no IP savviness, it would also indicate to the investors, well, if there are any problems coming up, they either won't see it or won't see it in time, or they will just do the wrong stuff. So the IP also reads back to the first part. The IP savviness of the team means, okay, this team can solve problems, they can understand problems, can solve problems. And third, with the market, you could say, well, if you're in an area where you have no clue what the others are doing in the IP world, for the patent journey, that would be maybe like an IP due diligence that you're doing. So if you have no clue about the other market, never looked around the fence, then this might also indicate on your market knowledge. So let's say from the investor's view, it's typically these three things: team, market, technology, with the key IP aspect to the technology, but also including those other ones. And with regard to the corporations, we have also a nice quote from a large corporation that is investing in companies or buying companies as one of their innovation strategy. And they said, okay, take IP very seriously, invest in it. So it would mean, include the IP work in your investment, like you do it for your production, like you include it for your market development, but of course with not necessarily the same size, but with a sort of same relative attention that this topic needs, and do this in time. So avoid that you, in the end, want to sell your business to a large chemical company and telling them, wow, world business and all these areas and so on, great technology, and then only offering in the US patent, because then they might say, well, you're offering me only the US market and not the rest of the world. So our valuation will be much smaller, or it's even void because we cannot practice it in our business model if it's not protected in the same way. And I think these are the two learnings from the investors and from the corporations that a startup can consider. And I would even say those SMEs who are maybe not doing for decades what they are doing, they ideally should also have a look at how the so-called startups are dealing with it and learn from them.
You have also just written a book chapter, some other topic now again, because I have the chance to pick your brain here in this interview, and I want to get as much value for the listeners as possible. And I just found out that you have written a book chapter on entitled Key Success Factors in Nurturing and Sustaining 21st Century Technology Clusters. Can you briefly explain what technology clusters are for listeners that are not so deep into this? We have listeners from like unfair competition law and from trademarks and so on. And what do you mean by nurturing and sustaining? What are the most important messages to tech-driven companies from that they can take from this book chapter?
Yeah, thank you. Basically, this publication, it's not published yet, it will be published beginning of next year. But it's based on a study that we did some years ago on the Chinese-based endeavors to leapfrog their innovation force. And interestingly, there were two things going on in parallel. One was updating and renewing their intellectual property regime, so their IP law. And at the same time, updating and renewing their commercial and investment law. So what could you do to invest in a place or not? And you could also see in a consequence, European companies like 10 years ago, they might have been afraid that their machines would have been copied, or the large corporations that when they were investing in for example, I just take China as an example, then they were typically afraid that their products could be copied or the whole company could be copied at that other place. And now today, the key strategy is Chinese investors just buy European companies like we had recently in Germany with KUKA that became a political case, even, and some other aspects. So it's a big initiative in case of China called the Road and Belt Initiative. And in that study, we tried to understand what was going on with a very large-scale strategy, and that there's in some own terms for that. And let's say in that case, it was directed to European companies. It was directed because those understanding maybe what's going on, not only on the small level, but on the large scale level, on the long-term level. With regard to policymakers, and that could be for the readers of that book also interesting, there is typically a fast or shortcut that, let's say some politicians at least like quickly to do. They look at Silicon Valley, they say, oh, this is great, what was done in California, so we want to be cool too, let's call our activities here also whatever Valley. And it's obviously it's not meant with a geographical perspective, but rather with a focus on a technology cluster, and where you would have different players on the same level at the same value chain, and also following that value chain, where you would have like competition in one area. Geographically combined in them. Also, expertise would be amalgamated there. It would be stacked. Experts would come there because they would know there's a career to be experienced there. You would not be stuck with one single company at one place with one head of that company. So you could move on and more, let's say, ecosystem players, like, for example, investors could go there. So it would be all that into that. But of course, to build up something like that from new is very difficult. And for those who like to compare with Silicon Valley, they should do some reading or some analysis, seeing that Silicon Valley is going back already from 50 years to defense investments. So it's still, as you can see this as in with Elon Musk now, a lot of money comes from the defense that is invested in those companies, where R&D is taking place for the defense perspective, and then rather outsourced into other areas, outspun into other areas like in the civil area, building our whole value chain coming from there. And so people like to copy Silicon Valley. They should be aware of this, acknowledging this, and then seeing whether this is a smart way to copy some other regions if they are not capable to. And from a strategic point of view, I would always rather say consider of being unique on your own, take the strengths you have. And from a branding perspective, well, if you're unique and really special, then you don't need to copy the branding terms from other areas. So become more specific.
Be more innovative, basically, right? So, we had a really interesting interview, and in the end, I want to ask you the most important question. Basically, I'm representing a lot of medium-sized companies. That's where I have most fun with, So, what are your 3 most important tips for medium-sized companies for improving their IP portfolio and their IP management? What can you tell them?
Yeah. Thank you for asking. First of all, I would say, like always, if you ask the goat about the gardening, take IP serious. As we're talking about IP, what does that mean? It would mean that the management has an understanding, the executive level has an understanding what this is useful for, what are the risks, and what are the opportunities. And saying this, risk mitigation is not only filing a patent is not just risk mitigation. Risk mitigation might mean understanding the risk, and then understanding what do you need to neutralize and which maybe not. And it also means opportunity creation. In management, we often talk about the so-called missed opportunities. So don't forget about the missed opportunities. If you just file a patent and forget about it, You're not supervising it. You're not enforcing it. You're missing out on that. Second, if you don't protect or think about those areas where you really create the value, and that is maybe not the machine anymore. It might be the service, it might be the software, it might be the whole system, where you cannot even file a patent anymore. You need to create a combined system of informal and formal protection mechanisms to create this with different people's internal and maybe also different suppliers outside. Then you're only playing or running on one leg. And in sports, we typically say become number one, and then the strategy is stay number one. And in IP, I would say, create value and capture the value. And third one, consider next to your strategy how you want to implement it. So what we mentioned beforehand, think about the processes you need to install. Think about the organizational part, and don't just outsource everything to your law firm because they invite you so nicely to the Christmas party every year. Consider really professionally what you outsource and how you manage these services that you buy in. And consider what you have to do on your own and how you have to develop yourself, continuing studies, as we say.
Yeah, be more proactive and understand IP better yourself, basically. Have a better understanding and not outsource everything, right? Yeah, that's also something I see. That usually helps with the happiness of my clients. That the more they know and the more they know about IP and the more actively they are involved in the decisions, the better it is for the company, basically. Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So we were just able to scratch the surface, basically, of all the topics we've covered. If people want to know more, where can they reach you best?
Yeah, thank you for asking this, Prof. Claessen. I think the most easiest way will be via LinkedIn. You find me on LinkedIn, Martin A. Bader, and you will also easily find my email either there or if you Google it at one of the affiliations.
Yeah, thank you very much for being on IP Fridays.
Thank you so much for the nice talk.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode. If you liked what you heard, please show us your love by visiting ipfridays.com/love and tweet a link to this show. We would be so grateful if you would do that. It would help us out to get the word out. Also, please subscribe to our podcast at ipfridays.com or on iTunes or Stitcher.com. If you have a question or want to be featured in one of the upcoming episodes, please send us your feedback at ipfridays.com/feedback. Also, please leave us a review on iTunes. You can go to ipfridays.com/iTunes and it will take you right to the correct page on iTunes. If you want to get mentioned on this podcast or even have comments within the next episode, please leave us your voicemail at ipfridays.com/voicemail. You have been listening to an episode of IP Fridays. The views expressed by the participants of this program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by their respective law firms. None of the content should be considered legal advice. The IP Fridays podcast should not be construed as legal advice or legal opinion on any specific facts or circumstances. The contents of this podcast are intended for general informational purposes only, and you are urged to consult your own lawyer on any specific legal questions. As always, consult a lawyer or patent or trademark attorney. Copyright 2014, all rights reserved.